Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Spirit of Prophecy podcast. I appreciate you joining me today. We've got a lot of information that we want to try to give you today. When it comes to this particular subject, there is a great deal of scripture that I could use to prove each of my points. I am not going to take the time to do that today. This would be too long. I will make many statements as a fact, and if you feel those are not facts and you need more evidence of that, let me know. Maybe I'll do future programs discussing those things. But when it comes to the subject of Israel and the Jews, there are a few areas where I think there are some major gaps in people's knowledge. I think there's a lot of technical mistakes that people make, and as a result of it, we often can sound like we are being inconsistent or debunking our own teaching. And so sometimes we've got to take the time to get really technical, get really specific, just to let people see that, you know what, when it comes to our doctrine, we are right. There are no inconsistencies. There's just often poor presentations. And so hopefully we can help settle some things today on this program to help us defeat the dispensationalists and to help us also get the dispensationalists, maybe the honest ones, to come over to our side and our way of thinking, which is the Bible way of thinking. And so I want to ask you a question right now, and that is, what is a Jew? What specifically is a Jew? And let me add a little bit to that and say, according to the scriptures. I understand that what a Jew is today is something very specific. It's an ethnic group. It is a religion. There are ethnic Jews. There are religious Jews. And there's a lot of things that people attribute to Judaism today. But does that line up with the scriptures? And I'm going to show you it does not. I'm going to show you that most people, especially dispensationalists, they don't understand what a Jew actually is. And if you don't understand what a Jew actually is, you might make the mistake of taking a promise to the Jews in the Bible and applying it to what is considered a Jew today. While our definitions often change throughout time, we need to understand the meaning of the Bible never changes. And so we have people today who are supporting the modern nation of Israel. They are calling an ethnic group God's chosen people, and they think they're following the Bible when they do that. And I keep asking the question, what is the connection? How are you connecting modern Israel and modern day Jews with the Israel and Jews of the Bible? And I'm not getting straight answers on that. And in fact, if I do get an answer, it's completely unbiblical, and it's usually a genetic thing. And I'm going to show you that's ridiculous in this program. And so while a lot of things I'm going to cover on here, I'm going to try to keep it as briefly as possible. While you have heard these things before, while we've covered them on these programs, there are a couple aspects of this we're going to go in depth on that we've not gotten into. But these things are crucial in helping you fully understand what's going on. Because one of the reasons there's so much confusion in American Christianity is because we like to, what I call, Americanize the Bible, meaning we apply our modern ways and customs or our modern way of thinking, our modern definitions to the scripture. We read the scriptures as if its meanings, its thinking, its ways are the same as ours today, and that causes people to go into all kinds of error. So for example, in America today, as a culture, as a people, we are very obsessed with race. And this is why people get confused about the Jews. They're really big on all things racial and ethnic, and the Bible doesn't really care about that. We are also a nation that is a republic rather than a monarchy. We're a nation of laws where the Constitution is the highest authority in the land. It's even over the president. We have a constitutional system. And, you know, that's what we're used to. That's all we know. But in the Bible, they had a different way. God would appoint men as leaders over things. God would establish kingdoms through men. We often think of a kingdom as the single reign of a king. But the reality is one kingdom could be considered the reign of many kings if they remained in that line and under that certain authority. And we're going to see that as we go. And so we would see there would be men who would establish nations and kingdoms. Those men would live normal lifespans, but their kingdom would go on through their sons. Their kingdom would continue in their name. For example, in Daniel's vision of the image with the head of gold, we understand that represented the Babylonian Empire, but specifically Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was the one that established that kingdom. Daniel told him, "You're that head of gold." But at the same time, when Nebuchadnezzar died, we did not go right into the silver period. No, it wasn't until later during the reign of Belshazzar, and Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom fell. The kingdom established by Nebuchadnezzar fell to the Medes and Persians during the reign of Belshazzar. But it was still the same kingdom, even though there was more than one king. When it comes to God's covenant with Abraham, that was a covenant with a man who God used to raise up a nation from. The nation that came from Abraham was not separate from the nation that came from Isaac and the nation that came from Jacob that God changed his name to Israel. It's the same nation. It's one nation. And so we need to understand, though, that God started that with Abraham, and there was an authority given to Abraham. It was never a genetic thing to be a part of that kingdom. It was an authority thing. And that's what we're going to see as we go through this. Because in our American way of thinking, we've made it all about the genetics, and it was never about the genetics. It was always about the authority. We're going to see that here in a little bit. So we want to make sure we're using proper terminology when it comes to Israel and the Jews. Because throughout the Bible, you do see the word Israel used in many different ways. For example, we have Israel the man, we have Israel the nation, we have Israel the geography or the land of Israel. And people, typically, they'll use the term Israel however they want, depending on what argument they're having. But we should always use the term, if we're using Scripture, use it the way the Scripture was using it at that time. People often read the Scripture where it's talking about a man, where it's talking about a nation, where it's talking about a land, and then they apply it to a nation today that started in 1948 that calls itself Israel without showing how it's connected. And that's a huge mistake. And so because there is not a consistent and proper use of the word Israel, and even Jews, when teaching throughout the Scriptures, there's often a lot of confusion where people are connecting two things that are not connected. And I'm going to show you exactly why the Jews of today are not connected to the Jews of the Bible. And those of us who understand the truth of this subject, it's very frustrating to listen to this because to a certain extent, there are some honest mistakes people make when it comes to this subject. So some are honest mistakes, some are a result of decades of Americanizing the Bible. So one thing we agree with dispensationalists on is that God is going to keep all of the promises that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or Israel. We just don't always agree on how he will keep those promises. But I intend to show you in this video exactly how to apply the promises to Israel that we see throughout the Bible. And there's a couple key areas where people are losing track of what's going on in the Bible, and it's causing them to miss the boat and get confused on many things. And we got to clear this up once and for all. So what we're going to do is we go through the history of Israel and the Jews. We're going to establish some terminology, and we're going to try to be consistent in our use of words, because those terms, even throughout the Bible, there's a change that takes place. There's clear historical, legal changes that take place. And so you can't just use it one way through the entire Scriptures. And so there's, again, an enormous amount of Scriptures we could go to. For time's sake, I'm going to use as little as possible. But I want everybody to test out what I'm saying with the Bible. If there's any points you don't feel I've been clear on or you need more convincing of, let me know and we'll try to cover that. So let's start out talking about Abraham. Okay, we're all familiar with Abraham, the man. This is the guy that God said, I'm going to raise up, I'm going to start a great nation with this man Abraham, and through his seed, someone who's going to come from Abraham, all the world is going to be blessed by that person. And God chose Abraham to be the one that he would raise up a nation from, where someone would come from that nation who would bless all of the world. And in Genesis 15, we're not going to read all this, but we have the story where God comes to Abram in a vision, and Abram's wondering what's going on because, hey, Lord, you promised you were me the seed, but I don't have any children. My heir is Eliezer of Damascus, a servant that is in my house. And God goes on to tell him, Abraham, I'm not going to fulfill this promise through a servant. It's going to be somebody who's going to come from your own bowels. And Abraham believed the Lord. He counted it to him for righteousness. And then God went on in verse 18, and he made a covenant with Abraham, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river Euphrates. And that's where we have the famous land promise that God gave to Abraham. God said, Abraham, that land is yours. And so the land that you see here on the map, right there, that represents the area that God promised to Abraham. It's his. And understand, Abraham himself in his lifetime, he never received these things. However, the people, the nation that it was promised to, okay, that did, and that fulfilled God's promise to Abraham. Because again, Abraham is the leader of a nation, even though as of right now, all it is Abraham and his servants, people that are a part of his house. Later Ishmael, but then Isaac. But this is the start of this nation. This is the land that they are promised. God's going to give them that land, and he's going to, with that land, with these people, fulfill his promise to bless all the world, and it's going to come from a direct descendant. He goes on in Genesis 15, explaining to him how his seed will be a stranger in the land that is not theirs, and they shall afflict them 400 years. So while we're all familiar with Galatians 3 and how the seed that was promised to was Jesus Christ, understand the dispensationalists are not wrong when they take certain promises to Abraham's seed and they apply it to those who are of Abraham's house. Now, where they're wrong is they specifically apply it to Abraham's descendants, but it was more than just his descendants. It was those that were of his house. That also would include his servants who were circumcised. If you go to Genesis chapter 17, we're not going to read through it all. God gives them the covenant of the circumcision, and he tells them, you be circumcised, your children, your servants, those bought with money, all of them were to be circumcised, and they were to show that covenant in their flesh. And in Genesis 17, that is exactly what happened. Even people who were purchased of a stranger, they were to be circumcised, and they were now under the authority of they're under the authority of Abraham. They are a part of this nation that God's raising up, a nation of separate people that God had made a covenant with, and God put the sign of that covenant in their flesh through the circumcision. So understand, there were many people who were of this nation who were not physical descendants. Right in the beginning, they weren't physical descendants. Now, the fulfillment of the promise of the seed that would bless all the world would come through a physical descendant. Make no mistake about that. But not all of those who are of the seed, all of those who are blessed, those who were the people of God, not all of them were physical descendants of Abraham. Many of them weren't. They were people that were purchased, his servants. There were even some who were of Abraham's physical lineage that were not a part of that covenant. For example, we have Ishmael. He was not a part of that covenant. In Genesis chapter 21, while Ishmael had been circumcised, in Genesis 21, after Ishmael was mocking Isaac, Sarah said, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. And while Abraham was sad about this, that is exactly what happened. And Ishmael was disinherited. But God told Abraham, go ahead and do that, because he said, I'm not going to raise up this nation that I promised through Ishmael. I'm going to do it through Isaac. I'll make a great nation of Ishmael, but that will be a separate nation. They will be a separate people. And understand the Ishmaelites are descendants of Abraham, but they were not a part of that covenant. Isaac is the one that God was going to establish the covenant through. Isaac is the one that the Messiah is going to come from. And understand that when Abraham died, all that was Abraham's became Isaac's, not anyone else. Genesis 25:5, and Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac. The land is Isaac's. The servants, the people, they're all under Isaac's authority, and Isaac would have had many servants. He would have had many great possessions. They were a mighty people, even though as far as physical descendants go from Abraham, we only have Isaac that's a part of that covenant. But when it came to the sons of the concubines, it said Abraham gave gifts and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he yet lived eastward unto the east country. So they weren't a part of that nation. They weren't a part of that covenant, even though they were descendants. So we have now, with Isaac, we have many people, hundreds, possibly thousands, who are a part of this covenant, who are a part of this nation that God is raising up. The Messiah is not going to come through the servants, but it is going to come through Isaac. And these are all the people of God. This is that nation, while there were others who descended from Abraham that were not a part of it. They were separate from that. And so Isaac, he received all that was Abraham's, and he is now, you could say, the leader of this nation. He is the one who has claim to the promises that God gave to Abraham, but God gave it to Abraham first. Isaac is continuing something God started with Abraham. So you know what we don't see Isaac do? We don't see Isaac pick a new land. We don't see him pick a new God. No, he is continuing in this covenant, and he is still technically under the authority of Abraham. He's still doing certain things that Abraham commanded, because and that was a necessary thing for him to do in order to continue being a part of that covenant. They're still doing the circumcision. They're still serving. He's still worshiping the God of Abraham and building altars and doing those things like Abraham did. And here in this picture, we have Isaac, and where Jacob come, and he's stealing the blessing from Esau. And we're not going to go into the details in that story, but we understand it's still not a genetic thing, because the exact same thing takes place that we saw with Ishmael, the sons of Keturah. They weren't part of it. Esau was also not a part of that Abrahamic covenant, even though he physically descended from Abraham, physically descended from Isaac. We see, though, that God made a nation out of Esau, the Edomites. However, they were a separate nation. They went away from Jacob, even though they're descendants, because it's still not a physical thing. And so it's worth noting when we point these things out that there were many in the nation at that time, even though physical descendants of Abraham are very few. For a long time, they are becoming a great people. But these few that we're seeing mentioned are the focal point, because it is through them physically that the promise to Abraham will be fulfilled through. And so we have Jacob, and Jacob, he was great, and he was rich as well, because he would have had many servants like his father Isaac did. He would have had all that was Isaac's. It would have been Jacob's as well. So we understand that God did not establish that covenant through Esau, but through Jacob. And then later, God is going to change his name to Israel. And understand what Jacob stood for, what Jacob promoted, was the same thing as Isaac and Abraham. Even though he is the new heir, he's the new one that the promise is going to come through. That doesn't give him the authority to change gods, change lands, or anything like that. No, he's continuing with this nation. He is going to build this nation that God started with Abraham. So it's the same nation, same authority. Again, let's not focus on the genetics. Many are of this nation before Jacob even has any children, but they're all under that same umbrella of authority of Abraham and Isaac. And so we see the genealogies in the Bible, and they were important for many reasons because of the Messiah. That was a specific thing. But genealogies were not necessary to make you a part of the nation. It was a matter of dwelling with them in the land, submitting to their ways and customs and the things that God commanded. So by the time we get to Israel the man, we should be well aware of the fact this is not strictly a genetic thing. Obviously, if they physically came from them, they were supposed to have them circumcised and keep them in the covenant. But if they were to leave the land and go start serving other gods, they no longer have claim to those promises anymore. This is about remaining a people under a covenant that comes with a great promise of God raising up a seed that he is going to bless all the world with. So after Israel the man, we have the 12 tribes established. And you all know the story. Hard times lead them into Egypt. Eventually, after much difficulty, they come out of Egypt. Then God gives them the Mosaic covenant or the law. And then they wander in the wilderness for 40 years. But eventually they would go and they would possess the land that God promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And for some weird reason, the dispensationalists want to debate us on this. But during the time of Joshua, they possessed all the land that God had promised to Abraham. It's also mentioned they had possession during the time of Solomon. Land promise kept, fulfilled. God always keeps his promises. But what about this law? What about this law that was given? Well, the law was given, and Galatians 3 explains this. That way, so they could survive as a people. Without a law, they are going to be destroyed. God did not want them going back to Egypt. No, God was going to give them this land so they could dwell in that land, so that God could put his tabernacle in the midst of them, so the Messiah could come from them, bring redemption to Israel. God did not want them going back to Egypt. One of the commands for any king that they ever had, he cannot take you as a people back to Egypt. They must remain in the land. But that law, it was given so they would survive as a people. If they have no law, they're going to end up being like Sodom and Gomorrah. And so it says in Galatians 3:19, wherefore then serve the law, it was added because of transgressions, till the seed should come to whom the promise was made. And it was ordained by angels in the hands of a mediator. And obviously Jesus was that seed. And so that law, it did a few things. One, it helped preserve them as a people. Another thing that the law did, it helped show them their sinfulness and God's holiness. Also, everything within that law, within the customs and the feasts and ordinances, it all pointed to Jesus Christ. It was intended to help them recognize the Messiah, to recognize the seed when he did come. Now, obviously, they didn't recognize the Messiah when he came because they weren't following the law very well at all. They were a very stiff-necked, rebellious people who did not follow God's law. But yet at the same time, God set them up for success, but obviously they failed big time. And so I think everyone would agree that after they go into the land, that being of Israel was not a guaranteed thing just because you descended from someone. You had to remain a part of that nation. They had to follow certain laws and customs. They had to remain under a certain authority. There was a certain agreement they had to have as a nation and as a people. And while we're all aware of the fact that they did a really bad job of keeping the law, understand that failure was a group effort and a group failure. They remained one nation and people, though, until the big split came during the time of Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And if you remember that story of Rehoboam and Jeroboam, this was a crucial time. And right here is where we're going to start seeing a little bit of change in terminology that's important that we get a hold of. Okay, so we've got Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Rehoboam, descendant of David. You have David, Solomon, Rehoboam. This is where we're going to start showing some biblical terminology to help un-Americanize you in your interpretation of the scripture. We have Jeroboam, who is king of the northern kingdom of Israel. Two kingdoms have been established. The kingdom of David has already a promise of preservation on it, which is why the kingdom was not completely taken away from David. Jeroboam has been offered a promise of preservation if he will be like David, which Jeroboam did not do. So we see the kingdom constantly changing. We see it constantly switching families and things like that. But the northern kingdom remained a kingdom for a very long time. But it eventually fell to the Assyrians. We'll see that in a little bit. But that southern kingdom, we now have a separate southern kingdom that is led by the throne of David, that is known as not the kingdom of Israel, but the kingdom of Judah. And I really need you to get a hold of that truth. Okay? I really need you to make sure you understand the difference here. And so we're going to start seeing a terminology here pretty soon that is new, that is different, that is specific to a time period. Because we've got two kingdoms, two nations, two people. Northern kingdom of Israel, southern kingdom of Judah. Now, which in those two kingdoms is God going to fulfill the promise of a Messiah through? The kingdom of Israel or the kingdom of Judah? And when I say that word kingdom, I hope you're thinking biblically in the definition of that word and you're not thinking like an American. It's going to be through the kingdom of Judah. And understand, these kingdoms, these authorities, they were about men, and it was specifically David. Even though David is dead and gone now during the times of Rehoboam, it's still the kingdom of David. It was still considered David's throne, David's kingdom, even though it's now Rehoboam. And we'll see that here in the scriptures in a little bit. And in 1 Kings 11:11, it says, "Wherefore the Lord said unto Solomon, For as much as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee and give it to thy servant. Notwithstanding, in thy days I will not do it, for David thy father's sake, but I will rend it out of the hand of thy son. Howbeit I will not rend away all the kingdom, but will give one tribe to thy son for David my servant's sake and for Jerusalem's sake, which I have chosen." And I think everybody understands this. We're not going to go to the scriptures on it. But David has already been chosen by God as the one that the seed is going to come from. Okay, we all agree. We'll even agree with the dispensationalists on that. So just as God did not have to take care of God did not have to include all of Abraham's descendants to fulfill his promise, he's going to do it through Isaac. Just as God did not have to, do things through all of Isaac's descendants, because we see Esau is left out, God does not have to fulfill his promise through all of the tribes of Israel. He only has to do it through one. He only needs one tribe to fulfill this promise that God promised to fulfill. And God chose Judah. And we see in Genesis, when Jacob's blessing his sons, we see a messianic prophecy in there. We might go to that later. But we understand that God chose that he is going to do this through David and through David's kingdom, through David's people, through David's throne, which is not Israel, but Judah. David, the kingdom of David, lost all the other tribes. And then Israel formed their own kingdom. And now David only has Judah. But God, that's enough for God to fulfill his promise. God only needs a remnant. And so God did not break his promise to David when he rent the kingdom from him. We have a remnant. 2 Kings 17:18 says, "Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them out of his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah only." See, when many of you think Israel, you think all the descendants of the 12 tribes. Okay, now while during certain periods in their history that was the case, understand during this time in their history that is not the case. Israel is a separate kingdom, separate from Judah. Also, Judah kept not the commandments of the Lord their God, but walked in the statutes of Israel which they made, and the Lord rejected all the seed of Israel. Well, wait a minute, wouldn't that include Judah? Because Judah Judah is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. But during this time of the two kingdoms, the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel are separate. Of course, Judah is still one of the tribes of Israel. Of course, Judah still has a connection to the children of Israel, to Israel the man. But there is a kingdom during this time that is called Israel, that is separate from Judah. And the Lord rejected them. He rejected all of them and delivered them in the hands of spoilers and cast them out of his sight. For he rent Israel from the house of David, and they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king. And Jeroboam drave Israel from following the Lord and made them sin a great sin. For the children of Israel walked in the sins of Jeroboam, which he did. They departed not from them, until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight. As he said by all his servants the prophets, so is Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria unto this day. Okay, now here's something I have to point this out because I'm speaking primarily to an American audience who their thinking on scriptures has been Americanized. The kingdom of Israel being destroyed did not mean all the descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel ceased to exist, but that kingdom, that throne, that authority was gone. The land that they had was taken over during that time. That kingdom's gone. It's no longer a thing anymore. It would be like if our nation got taken over and our government was overthrown and a new nation took over and then the Americans got scattered all over the place. Yeah, while we might descend from Americans and we were Americans, there's no America anymore because the system that was in place is gone and America is over. Israel is gone at this point. Just like you could never get rid of all the Americans and their descendants, you're never going to get rid of all of Israel and all of their descendants, but you can definitely get rid of the kingdom. And that is exactly what happened. And that kingdom was not going to come back. That kingdom never came back. Okay? And so keep that in mind. That nation, that particular throne would never be restored, but that didn't make the descendants without hope of being restored to the covenant, because that covenant is still alive and well. It's a promised thing, but it's not going to be through that kingdom of Israel. It's gone. It's going to be through the kingdom of Judah. Hopefully you all get this. I dare you all to challenge me on this stuff. There was still a kingdom they could be restored to under the authority and line of David. But you see, when Israel rebelled against the throne of David, they left his authority. That's not good. If you want to be able to claim the things that God promised to David, you've got to be a part of his people and under his authority. If you want to claim the promises God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it's not enough that you just descend from them physically. You got to remain under their authority and under their kingdom. Hey, so in 2 Kings 17, where God casts Israel out of his sight and they're done. You know what's interesting? One chapter before that, we see a word used for the first time in the Bible. And this is a word that dispensationalists don't understand, and that is the Jew. And it says at that time, Rezin, king of Syria, recovered Elath to Syria and drave the Jews from Elath, and the Syrians came to Elath and dwelt there unto this day. The Jews were of Judah. And I'm not saying that just because it sounds like that. That's a fact. Just look up the word and the Hebrew meaning and all that, Yehuda, all that. And everybody agrees. Everybody understands a Jew is somebody from Judah and not just a descendant of Judah. Okay? Get a hold of this. Someone under the authority of the kingdom of Judah, under the kingdom of David. Because guess what? There were a bunch of different tribes that were considered Jews. Later we'll see that in a little bit. But Judah and David, they are the new authority over Israel. They are the ones that God is going to establish the covenant through, and the people are all the tribes are supposed to follow Judah. Even when Jacob blessed his sons, they were commanded to follow Judah. He was supposed to be the judicial head of his people. And so just like if you're not under the authority of the Constitution, you're not an American. And if you're not under the authority of the throne of David, you're not a Jew. So get a hold of that. So the thing is, people are always saying, well, Abraham was the first Jew. Well, wait a minute. That's not technically true. Being a Jew is being of Judah. Now, for sure there's a connection there. For sure there's a connection, because the promise that God gave to Abraham went to Isaac, that went to Jacob, or Israel the man. And that promise continued with the Jews in Judah, not the kingdom of Israel. So yes, there is for sure a connection from Abraham to the Jews hundreds of years later, because it's continuing to get narrowed down, because it was never all the descendants. I shouldn't have to keep repeating that, but I do, because of Americans and their obsession with race. But 2 Chronicles 10:16, I want you to notice the way this is worded here, because this is what's foreign to us as Americans. When all Israel saw that the king would not hearken unto them, the people answered the king, saying, what portion have we in David? And we have none inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to your tents, O Israel. And now, David, see to thine own house. So all Israel went to their tents. So wait a minute. This is during the reign of King Rehoboam. I thought David was dead. Why are they talking to David in this way? Why are they telling David to see to Judah? Can somebody explain that to me? What's going on here? Because Rehoboam is on the throne of David. He is the leader of the kingdom that God established and started with David. And Israel, the tribes of Israel, they have said, we no longer are going to follow David. We are no longer are going to be led by Judah. You take care of yourself. We're going to do our own thing. And years later, God cast them out of his sight. And their kingdom fell and it was destroyed. And so the Old Testament is very consistent in its terminology, distinguishing between Judah and Israel. But Jews are those of the southern kingdom, those who are under the authority of David and the throne of David, the kingdom of David. And so this, where people start getting confused again, though, is after the Babylonian captivity and in the New Testament, because again, historically things change. But I want to make this clear for everyone, because in Ezekiel, we're going to see a prophecy about these two kingdoms coming back together, which would be a major process that would not happen overnight. Many prophecies like that, while they're given in a few verses and it kind of tells of one outcome that we, in our minds, we often see it happening in a day, but sometimes these things happen over long periods of time. They were a process in many cases. And I believe we are seeing the fulfillment of these prophecies in the first century, during the life of Christ and after the life of Christ. I'm not going to go into all the details on that. There's a lot of details we can go into. But this is where we start disagreeing with the dispensationalists on how God will keep his promises to Israel. Because while there are many promises that we could both go to and apply in different ways, I encourage you to see who's consistent in their explanation. And while I can't possibly go to all the scriptures they would bring up and show where they're wrong, I can't possibly go to all the scriptures that I could point to show where we're right. I do want to focus on one prophecy, though, in Ezekiel. And we're going to interpret it the way the dispensationalists do, and then we're going to interpret it the way I believe God intended. And you be the judge of who is using scripture properly. So in Ezekiel 37:16, it says, moreover, thou son of man, take thee one stick and write upon it for Judah, for the children of it, and for the children of Israel and his companions, and take another stick and write upon it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for the house of Israel, his companions. And so just as Judah was leader of the southern kingdom, eventually, not right away, but eventually, Ephraim became the lead tribe over the northern kingdom. When Ezekiel is written, Israel has already been destroyed, but the descendants are scattered all over the world. The people are still around, and the people who were from that kingdom, it's being prophesied, are going to be restored to the covenant. But you're going to see they're going to be the kingdom of Israel is not going to come back. No, the remnant of the people of the kingdom of Israel are going to be restored into the kingdom of Judah. They're going to be back under that authority because God keeps his promises. God doesn't switch people. God didn't switch Abraham with somebody else, or Isaac and Jacob or David. So God's not going to raise up this new kingdom with a new people. No, God's going to bring the remnant of these people back under the authority of David's throne, of Judah. And so that's why in the New Testament, we see people from tribes that were originally a part of that northern kingdom also seen as Jews. Why? Because over time, they were being restored back into that kingdom and in that system that they had. Now, there's a lot of details we can go to on that. While you had the Pharisees and the Jews, and they had kind of created all these different classes of Jews, and you had your outcasts of Israel and all these different things, and while they weren't treating their own brethren very well, which is what the story of the prodigal son is all about. The prodigal son represents all of those of Israel, all those of the northern kingdom who went and got themselves in all kinds of trouble, defiled themselves in all these different ways. And the Jews of Judah, those who had remained loyal, kind of the more, hardcore, I don't know, however you want to put it, they didn't like seeing all these other people being restored and Jesus accepting these people. They were constantly shutting their own out of the kingdom because there was still a lot of hostility. Just like in some places, there's still a little bit of hostility between Northerners and Southerners. In America, well, it was even more the case in Israel during that time. But God said they're going to become one stick in thine hand. And so that's what Ezekiel 37 is all about. Now, I'm going to go back to Ezekiel 37 in a little bit because there are some verses in there I understand where dispensationalists get confused. I understand why they think certain aspects of it have not been fulfilled. I get that. Some of it's a pretty honest mistake. I'm going to tell you what the explanation is without spending a whole lot of time proving it, but then I am going to give you one really good illustration to show how what they are demanding be the fulfillment is literally impossible. And I'll explain that as shortly as I can. But let's go to Ezekiel 37 in verse 26. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to interpret this for you the way dispensationalists do. And in dispensationalists, I dare you to tell me that I am misrepresenting you on this, because one of the just key lines that dispensationalists quote over and over again is the church and Israel are not the same. The church is not Israel. Israel is not the church. That's what they say. That's what they tell us. They tell us that over and over again. Again, they don't understand the church. They don't understand Israel. They don't understand authority. They don't even know what a Jew is. There's a million reasons they get that wrong. But while we all agree that they don't believe the church and Israel are the same, they believe it's a separate group, that God has a separate covenant for all these things. If that's true, this is how they have to interpret and read Ezekiel 37:26. It says, "Moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them." Israel, not the church. "It shall be an everlasting covenant with them." Israel, not the church. "And I will place them," Israel, not the church, "and multiply them," Israel, not the church, "and will set my sanctuary in the midst of them," Israel, not the church, "forevermore. My tabernacle also should be with them," Israel, not the church. "Yea, and I will be their God," Israel, not the church, "and they," Israel, not the church, "shall be my people. And the heathen shall know that I, the Lord, do sanctify Israel," not the church, "when my sanctuary shall be in the midst of them," Israel, not the church, "for how long? Forevermore." Okay? Now, the dispensationalists will tell you Ezekiel 37 is about Israel. They will tell you Ezekiel 37 is prophetic about a future restoration for Israel. That is absolutely ridiculous. And what's funny about that is the same people that will claim 37 is for an ethnic group in the future today, on a different day, they will go to Revelation 21 and they will apply it to the church. Okay, now, if you don't think Revelation 21 and Ezekiel 37 are connected, I don't know what to tell you. Okay, but let me show you something. You say, well, there's going to be some differences. Things that are different are not the same. Well, great job repeating one-liners and catechisms and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, yes, there's some differences here, and I'll explain why that is. But either way you look at it, even if you claim these to be two different things, it is literally impossible for both of these things to happen in the way dispensationalists say they are going to happen. What the way dispensationalists interpret Ezekiel 37, it is literally impossible for that to happen if what they are saying is true about Revelation 21 and the way it's going to happen. And so this is the way so Revelation 21, let's take their logic of the church not being Israel and apply it to Revelation 21 that they would agree is for the church. And it says, and I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. The church, not Israel. And he will dwell with them. The church, not Israel. And they shall be his people. The church, not Israel. And God himself shall be with them. The church, not Israel. And be their God. The churches, not Israel's. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. The churches, not Israel's. Yea, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things have passed away. Now, folks, I think we have to agree. There's only one God, there's only one people of God, and there's only one forever. Ezekiel 37 for sure is addressing Israel, but it will find its fulfillment under the new and better covenant that include and contain new and better promises. Interestingly enough, right after that in Revelation 21, and he sat upon the throne and said, behold, I make all things new. And he said to me, write, for these words are true and faithful. What the dispensationalists are doing today is they are demanding that the inferior promises still come to pass, which is ridiculous. And then they go as far as those of us who look at the new and better promises and we say, no, I expect that. They accuse us of saying that God is a liar. But that is ridiculous. Imagine if I said to you, I promise you, I'm going to give you $100 next week. And then the next week, I give you $1,000. Did I lie to you? No, I gave you the $100 and then some. I actually did better. So that's not me lying. What if I said to you, I'm going to give you $100 next week? And then I gave you $100, and I also gave maybe somebody you don't like $100 as well. Would that upset you? Would that be me breaking my promise to you? How would you react to that? You know how many people would react? You know how the dispensationalists act when we show that we are included in these promises? They act like the older brother in the parable of the prodigal son who did not like seeing the younger brother restored into fellowship with the father. They felt, which is representative of that northern kingdom of the outcasts of Israel. And you can even make an application toward the Gentiles there. They didn't like seeing that restoration, even though, there was still a relationship between the father and the older brother. That older brother just couldn't stand seeing that with the younger brother. And that's the way the Jews were towards those that they didn't feel were worthy of the kingdom. While they were in authority, they were shutting people out of the kingdom, which is why Jesus said the kingdom is going to be taken from you and given to another nation. You're stopping people from entering, and you're not even going in yourselves. And so we have the dispensationalists today that just insist of keeping us out of the covenants and promises that God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that is absolutely ridiculous. That's absolutely contrary to the scriptures. And then to think that they would accuse us of calling God a liar because we're expecting something better than what was originally promised. Because what was originally promised was something that was given based on keeping of the law, which Israel never did. So rather than God just destroying them, one from Israel comes, does keep the law, and brings in a new and better covenant with new and better promises. So God doing good to others besides the Jews is not God breaking his promise. Just like in the parable of the workers, you had those who had been working the full day, the 12 hours. You had those that came in at the 11th hour, and the master did good to them and gave them the same thing. And those who had worked all day, they got angry. Surely we're going to get something better. And basically the moral of the story is, hey, I am not doing you evil by doing them good. You agreed to work for a penny, and they got what they agreed on. They should have been thankful for it. And the fact that he chose to do good to someone else, that was no skin off their nose. He wasn't taking away from them. And let me tell you something, we are not taking anything away from the Jews, the legitimate Jews, the people that God promised things to, when we include ourselves in these things. No, that's not taking anything away from them. But yet for some weird, demented reason, people think that no, we must claim something for an ethnic group that excludes us. And so the way they do it, they take titles from the Bible and they say, we can't have them. We can't claim them. But that's ridiculous because, again, this is not about genetics. It was never about genetics. It was about authority. And so think about this. If it's about authority, which is what it is, in Genesis 18, when God had chosen Abraham, God said, for I know him, he will command his children and his household after him. They shall keep the way of the Lord, do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which was spoken of him. God chose Abraham. God chose Isaac. God chose Jacob. God chose Judah. And God chose David. God chose David and his authority. God chose David and his throne. And so to think and so to imagine a people who reject David, who did not follow David's authority and his leadership, why would they have any claim to the promises of God? Because it's about authority. And interestingly enough, God had, just as God had chosen Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Judah, and David, Jesus Christ was the chosen. Those guys were only chosen to be the one that the Messiah would come from. Jesus was chosen to be the actual Messiah, which is why in Luke 23:34, when Jesus is being crucified and they're telling him to come off the cross, if he be the Christ, the chosen of God, because that's what the Christ was, the one God chose. 1 Peter 2:4 says, to whom coming as unto a living stone, disallowed indeed of men, but chosen of God and precious. Jesus was the chosen one. Jesus was the one that God chose to raise up from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, David. And then you had many of the Jews who received Jesus as the Messiah, followed him, remained, and they were baptized into that, and they became a part of that new covenant. And you're going to say that those people are separate from they're separate from the promises to Israel? They somehow separated themselves from the promises God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? No, they sealed themselves in those things when they did that. And the Jews who rejected, which was a majority, just as a majority rejected the throne of David, the majority rejected Jesus Christ. And just as the majority that rejected David, that kingdom was destroyed and fell. That kingdom that ultimately rejected Jesus Christ, it was destroyed and it fell. And yes, there are descendants from it, but just as the descendants of the kingdom of Israel were able to be restored into Judah, the descendants of that kingdom in Jesus' day can be restored to the covenants if they will have faith in Jesus Christ, if they will get back under the authority of Judah, of David, of Jesus, because you can't separate those things. Jesus did not rebel against David or Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. No, Jesus is the one that they were looking for, that they were waiting for. And so to say that you are a Jew today when you don't follow the Lion of the tribe of Judah, when you don't follow the seed of Abraham, the son of David, for you to call yourself a Jew is absolutely ridiculous. And so I get it. The word has changed. Today, there is an ethnic group out there that is called the Jews, but they have no connection to the Jews of Scripture that have promises coming to them. Those are fulfilled to those who follow after Christ. That is indisputable. And so just as Jesus was the chosen of God, as stated in 1 Peter 2:4, he goes on to say in 1 Peter, but ye are a chosen generation and a holy nation, a peculiar priesthood. But what were we chosen for? Well, Israel was chosen to be the nation the Messiah would come from. The Messiah has already came, so we're not chosen for that. But we are chosen to show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. You know what we are chosen to do as the people continuing in that covenant of Abraham? You know what we are to do as Abraham's seed? We are supposed to praise Jesus Christ. We are supposed to point people to Jesus Christ. We're supposed to follow whatever he says to do. We're supposed to follow, just as Moses said, when that prophet like me comes, you do whatever he says to do. When, like Jacob told Judah, when Shiloh comes, unto him should the gathering of people be. And we've got people from all over the world, from all different families, who have followed after Jesus Christ, who have accepted his sacrifice as payment for their sins, and they believed on him, and they're living their life for him. They are the ones with claim to the promise because they are under that authority, and they are a part of that nation that God established and started with Abraham. And I'm thankful to be a part of it. And so I am chosen. I am a chosen person. I am a chosen people. I have been chosen to point people to Jesus Christ, to lift up and glorify the name of Jesus Christ. And yet people, even Christians today, the actual chosen people, will look at an ethnic group today and say that they're the chosen people. Chosen for what exactly? Can you please explain that to me? And sometimes they will rightfully say things that the Jews were originally chosen for, but it's like, that was already fulfilled. That's done. What God wanted to accomplish through the people and through the land was fulfilled and finished by Jesus Christ. And you want to claim the inferior promises and demand some kind of land grab over there, when the reality is Jesus Christ has all power in heaven and earth. The whole world is his. Isn't that better? Yeah, he possessed the land of Israel, but he possessed more than that, the whole world. It's all his. And we are a part of it, his kingdom today. Again, pointing people to him, pointing out these spiritual truths, waiting for the time of the resurrection, where people like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will be able to enjoy the land, when the 12 disciples will be judging the 12 tribes of Israel and things like that in the future. Yeah, we're waiting for the resurrection when all that's going to be fulfilled. But in the meantime, the place in the Middle East today, the ancient land of Israel, that a new group has come along who reject Jesus as the Messiah and have claimed the name of Israel and claimed the name of Jews, they are fraudulent. They say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. I'm not saying they're not the ethnicity that they're claiming. I mean, for all I know, they might be direct descendants, purebred, people from those, that descend from Abraham. I'll give it to them, but it doesn't matter. They're not under that authority. They are in rebellion to Judah. They are in rebellion to David, to Jesus Christ, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are not a part of the people, but they are a people who can be restored if they will believe on Jesus Christ. And the day of salvation is now, according to the Apostle Paul. What Isaiah prophesied, Paul said was now. There's not going to be another day of salvation for them in the tribulation, in Daniel's 70th week, and all that nonsense that the pre-tribbers have come up with. So they have an excuse to get on board with a foolish American political Zionist movement and support the Israelis. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's not a genetic thing. It was never a genetic thing. It's an authority thing. God had men over these things, and God started that nation with Abraham, and God started it with him, promising that he would raise up a seed that all the world be blessed by. And God fulfilled that promise. That seed was Jesus Christ. He inherited all things. We are joint heirs with Christ. And so all that was Abraham's became Jesus's. And all that was Jesus's became mine when I believed on him, and I became a joint heir with him. And any Jew who is not of faith has nothing without Christ. For without me, you can do nothing, and you know what? They have nothing. And so Baptists, especially, if I can get them to just repent of this racist, Zionist foolishness, it would be a great day. They would understand the scriptures a lot better. But I dare you to challenge me. on the way I presented this today. It's an authority thing. It's not an ethnic thing. The authority was the authority of men. And you follow that chain of command, went from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, David, and Jesus Christ. And so do not look for promises to be fulfilled. Do not look for a people that you can bless, that will cause you to be blessed, that are disconnected from Jesus Christ. Absolute foolishness. Let's call it out for what it is. And so thank you so much for watching this. I hope it was a help and a blessing. God bless you. We'll see y'all next time.